I really appreciate everyone who's joined us. And as always, it's wonderful to partner with HCI and Eightfold appreciates the opportunity to partner with Deloitte. As mentioned, my name is Jason Serrato. I'm the Vice President of Talent Center Transformation. I've been with the organization for 4 years, and I help organizations understand what AI enables and unlocks in organizations as they try to go through workforce transformation as technology and talent come together for the future. So I'm working with organizations on a daily basis as they're evaluating technology, as they're looking to transform processes and design new ways of addressing problems going forward in this world of work. I've been lucky enough to do a series of these conversations with some of the thought leaders from Deloitte as part of expanding into deeper dives into Deloitte's Human Capital Trends report. And I've been joined by many of their thought leaders, such as Sue Cantrell and Nate Painter and Dave Mallon. And today we're supported by Sana Monzo, who's also been involved in several of these conversations. But today, I appreciate the opportunity to be joined by Victor Reyes for the first time as we take a special dive into some of the value cases related to technology and trends and what organizations need to do to really reevaluate their business case. Victor Reyes is from Deloitte, as mentioned, and he has a particular focus on supporting areas in energy, resources, and industrial clients. But without further ado, Victor, thank you so much for joining me today. I'm really excited to take a deeper dive in this specific area. I really enjoy these conversations to learn more about what Deloitte's doing with the organizations that you're partnering with, as well as kind of what's deeper in the research as I look forward to reading this report every year. Thank you for joining us.
Yeah, thank you, Jason. Really appreciate it, and really appreciate the opportunity to come together. As part of our ongoing partnership. So thanks for the introduction. Again, as Jason said, I'm a managing director in our human capital practice. My day job is to be out in the marketplace working with organizations, with HR and other business leaders around their workforce strategy, their talent strategies, and how to enable that with technology. But off the side of the desk, I also happen to be one of the lead authors on the 2025 Human Capital Trends, which was a really wonderful thing to be a part of. And so near and dear to my heart, and happy to share some of the research with you today, and to do that in conversation with Jason, and sort of make it real and answer some of your questions. So I guess let's dive right into it, if we might. And what we've chosen to do, and at the end of this deck, you'll see some QR codes and some links to our whole report. We're going to give you just a quick snapshot of what this study is, the piece of research is about, and then we're going to dive into a couple of specific trends from this year's report that we think were really interesting and relevant to this audience, and really have a deep connection to some of the things that we're seeing in the market with Eightfold. So let me tell you just a little bit about the overall Deloitte Human Capital Trends report. It is a sort of a flagship piece of thought leadership for us. Next year will be our 15th year publishing the report. It's really last year, if you're at all familiar with it, we really leaned into this theme of human performance being driven by a combination of human outcomes and business outcomes. And we'll talk more about that, you'll see as we go along, but human outcomes being things like engagement and well-being and productivity and all sorts of things that we're all familiar with, along with the hard business outcomes that are important to the bottom line. And really, how do you produce those things in combination? And so we've taken that theme forward, but we sort of dug into what some of the implicit tensions are if you're trying as a leader to make that happen in your organization in today's environment. What choices do you have to make? How do you think about that? So it is a global study. You see 93 countries we go out to. We have over 13,000 respondents. We're able to segment by senior executives and sort of the broader workforce, which provides some interesting cuts of data and perspectives. There's a lot of material in the overall report that we encourage you to kind of look at, and it's very modular and unpack it bit by bit and take it and use it, hopefully, in your own conversations with your teams and with your customers and clients, and use the data points. So want to just orient you to another sort of overarching theme from this year's report that you'll see if you do take a chance and look at the chapters or the infographics or the videos woven throughout. And we'll talk about a couple of these today, which is this idea of tensions and navigating tensions that arise as you're talking about talent and workforce and the introduction of new technologies or trying to achieve different outcomes. And so you see a couple of them here, like the tension between technology being a way of augmenting human performance and human abilities and skills versus being a way of kind of straight away automating processes and tasks. The tension between standardization of processes and experience and personalization, or the tension between the stability that the workforce often craves from their employer and organization and the agility that senior business leaders want to foster to be able to respond to market conditions, for instance. And so what we're suggesting is not that these are binary choices, that there's a right or a wrong answer. The answer is probably going to be about balance, and it's probably going to change at different moments in time. But what we have found it to be useful as we've taken this out and had conversations is it gives you another way of thinking about some of the challenges and a little bit different vocabulary around it.
So Victor, I was going to ask you a question. Yeah. Is there, I know this kind of you think like work-life balance, but is there such thing as balance? Or is it just the acknowledgement and awareness that these tensions are dynamic? And are we getting to the point where some of the value comes from the ability to visualize and quantify where you are between these tensions to be able to make better decisions?
Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. And I think that's a great example, because I think we all find increasingly that the very concept of work-life balance means such vastly different things to everybody in your workforce. I mean, and what is balance or integration to me is very different than what it is to some of my colleagues. Sure. And so the organizational implication for that is, and we talk a little bit about this in one of the trends, is how do you tap into that? Like, how do you actually tap into what motivates each individual worker? Rather than sort of paint with a broad brush or make assumptions that aren't really true about what people want and what's important to them. So, and how do you leverage data and tools to do that?
So, like one of the ones that's very near and dear to my heart is your first one there, augmentation versus automation, with a title like transformation, leading a transformation team. There's always this kind of balance between, are we optimizing and automating, or are we truly transforming? And what does that conversation look like? And what does that work look like? And how big do we think versus how much can we get done and accomplish? And how do we break that up into achievable pieces? And you're always trying to balance not boiling the ocean while still trying to do things the right way, in a way that has some long-term sustainable benefits. But this balance between how do I get my job done in the near term versus how do I do it in a way that's going to truly drive transformation is this incredible tension that probably a lot of people on the call today are living through.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. For sure. So maybe one last, kind of call out before we sort of ask you a question. So get ready for a quick polling question. But another sort of broad theme in this year's research was kind of the role of leaders across all of the different issues that we brought up, whether it's some of the AI issues that we're going to talk about in a minute, or making investment decisions, or motivating your people, or thinking about early career talent. All of those things, feature in the report. So what's the role of leaders, and what can they do differently, and how can they show up? Because we firmly believe that leadership is as important or more important than ever. And a couple of things that we sort of talk about. One is make sure you're looking at not just, we talk about making data-driven decisions or using data to inform decisions. Make sure you're looking at the right data, not just the data that's handy. Right. So, and sometimes that's the case, and that can introduce, friction, but it's important. The second is you know, think broadly about who you're engaging, which doesn't mean everybody has to agree on everything. As I like to tell my clients, you know, alignment is not the same as agreement or consensus. But it is important to have a broad set of stakeholders, and we'll talk quite a bit about that when we get to the business case discussion. And then make sure that the that decisions are happening at the right places in your organization, and challenge where decisions are happening today versus where maybe they should happen, and different kinds of decisions at different points in time, because that can be also very empowering. It can unlock a lot of agility if you sort of challenge some of those orthodoxies. So,
Is there something built into the conversations or engagements you're having around changing the thinking or coaching these organizations on the life cycle or the duration of these decisions? Because
yes.
with the pace of change or the speed of business, the the kind of the length for which
Hmm.
these decisions are going to last or endure is getting shorter and shorter.
Hmm.
So
Absolutely.
so
Yeah.
the amount of time we spend kind of weighing and deciding,
Hmm.
it's almost as if sometimes
Yes.
we spend more time deciding than the decision will be in
That's
place.
that's right. That's right. We're seeing that show up in lots of different ways, right? I mean, I think that to me speaks to a couple things. One is what can be rigidity around your decision making process, so that you're not applying the right level of scrutiny and criteria to the right types of decisions. Not all decisions are created alike. You know, everybody likes to talk about Jeff Bezos and his concept of, you know, one-way door decisions versus two-way door decisions.
Yeah,
I think that's one good way to think about it. Also, we'll talk in our business case discussion about, you know, probabilistic decisions. You know, realizing that in some cases you're going to place some bets. Not everything's going to work out. That's okay as long as we have some rigor around that. So I totally agree with you. I think really questioning even how is your organization making decisions, and is it fit for purpose, right? Um, so maybe with that, just to keep us moving and get some feedback from you all, we'll turn to a polling question. So, in one word or short phrase, what's the most important outcome you want from your next technology investment? Because we'll be talking about that.
so this is a word cloud. So we'll give you a chance to look at the QR code here and provide some answers, and we'll see what we get in. How are you seeing this possibly change or shift in some of the conversations you're having with Deloitte clients, Victor?
Yeah, you know, it's changing in a lot of different ways. It's changing in the sense that you mentioned also, which is time horizons in some cases, where the very types of investments are changing because the technology is changing. The expectations of what those investments are expected to provide is changing, and so you may have to lengthen your time horizons, which your CFO is always going to like. So we'll talk a little bit about that. I also think that, you know, we'll talk a lot about this blend of kind of human and business outcomes that you're expecting from making, you know, really great investments in technology, and who gets to make those choices. And again, back to the decision question: who's engaged in those decisions, regardless of quote unquote whose budget it's coming from, right?
Sure.
Which is often what sort of seems to drive the process, but that's not always the entire answer. So we're getting some good feedback here.
When you
Interesting efficiency, yeah.
when,
So,
when when you say human and business, are you also alluding to quantitative versus qualitative?
yeah, there is a bit of that. I'd say there's a there's qualitative outcomes and benefits that are always really important. There's always also the challenge of saying, are there things that we've previously treated as qualitative outcomes that we could actually quantify if we thought about it differently, or if we applied ourselves a little differently. The data might not be as readily available, but are there some way? You know, I'll give you an example. I have conversations with clients around innovation, you know, and innovation feels like this wonderful big qualitative conceptual thing, but how do you measure it? And there are elements of it that you can't measure. I
Yeah.
would concede, but there are organizations I've worked with that have looked at some different things, like what percentage of our revenue is coming from new products every year? What's our product development cycle looking like, and are we moving the needle on how quickly we're able to get things out to market and iterate? And those are very measurable quantitative things that also, by the way, have some powerful linkages back to talent, because talent is what drives innovation as much or more
Sure.
than anything else, right?
I think a lot of predictable answers here, but we'll see how
Yeah,
this is also changing as we go through the content here today, don't you think,
it
Ricky?
is. Yeah, absolutely. So ROI for sure. Efficiency is really big. So I know that's top of mind for a lot of my clients as well. But then all of these important things that surround it, which is, something that's practical, something that's delivering business value, productivity. I love that. Collaboration. That's a great example of a human outcome that also has profound business implications. Great. Well, thank you for that. And so maybe we'll sort of dig into we're going to take you into the two of our trends here, which we think are really closely coupled. Before we start to talk about the nits and gnats of the business case, since a lot of that really does relate to the introduction of AI and AI related tools and capabilities into the work and the workforce. What are we seeing? Like, what's that doing in terms of workforce experience, and what are its implications? Because that's also going to tie to how I think about the investments that I'm making. So the question, the kind of the core question we try to answer in this particular trend, this chapter, is: do I need to update our employee value proposition for an AI powered world? What does that look like? And it really speaks to some of the tensions that I mentioned earlier between, Jason, one of your favorites, automation versus augmentation, but also control versus empowerment. As I introduce these tools, AI, agentic AI, like, who's making decisions, who's making choices about the work on a day-to-day basis, and how do I feel about that organizationally, and what does it mean to my people when maybe there are agents that are making decisions that previously they did, or I've got to be the recipient of some of that work product as opposed to the producer of some of that work product, as an example, in a variety of different business processes, whether they're talent related or otherwise. And so what we saw from our research was a couple of things. You see the data points here that, both a good and a bad news story, right? On the one hand, really exciting and interesting is that we heard 70% of managers and workers are actually really excited about an organization that's leaning into AI and helps them be successful in an AI powered world. Like,
Sure.
employees, the workforce is valuing that, is what we're hearing. Like, I want to be a part of this if I'm part of an organization that's going to help me. On the other hand, more than half of the workforce is really worried about how's this all going to
Sure.
play out, and what's it going to mean for me, and what's it going to mean for my job and my day to day, right? And
And
so, yeah, please, Jason, jump in.
I like your slide there because your title there said revolutionizing work, because
Hmm.
we've gone through digital transformation, and then that led to everyone focusing on talent transformation, and now
Yep.
with those two things working together, we're really going through work transformation, right?
Yes.
We've enabled new ways of getting your job done, we've enabled new ways of working together, and now
Hmm.
as a result of that, we're enabling a whole new way of designing work, building organizations, designing teams, even thinking of the construct of companies, right? The size of
Yes.
companies, the size of teams, how you manage, how you lead, how you organize departments, how you make decisions. So this really
100%.
is looking at things in a new way. At
100%.
Eightfold, we have a podcast called The New Talent Code, where we talk to leaders that are going through these transformations, and we talk about how you need to think, manage, and measure differently, because this is more than just a technology transformation. And there's technology involved, there's rethinking workflows, there's also leadership communications, there's culture, there's organizations. We talk to a lot of organizations that are going through this journey, and in some cases they say when they've tried this in the past, the technology wasn't ready, and people
Yep.
were trying to achieve some of these things, and the technology was holding them back. Now, the technology has almost leapfrogged the conversation, and the technology is unlocking a lot of this capability. and the people aren't ready. The people are the bottleneck. So there's a
hmm
cultural component, there's a leadership component, there's an organizational component, and it needs all of these pieces coming together to really create this compounding effect. But
Yep.
that's also why, to get back to our topic today, as you're putting together these business cases and these value cases, how you're measuring the return and measuring the value really needs to kind of be thought of a little differently. We had a leader at one of our organizations say, when you start doing this, some of the benefits become so broad
Mm-hmm.
that if you're not very specific and focused on what you're measuring, they can actually become diluted because they start to affect so many things and dissipate across the organization. So
hmm
these things can become so powerful, they also become harder to measure.
Yep, yep, absolutely, absolutely. Couldn't agree more. So maybe what I thought maybe we could do is just share with you a couple of nuggets from this particular chapter around what we mean by what does this mean? What is AI meaning for the workforce and for the value proposition, and what we call sort of the potential silent impacts of AI, right? So, and these are we're not coming down on one side or the other that look, the genie's out of the bottle, right? This is going to transform, as you said, Jason, not just the way we work, but the work itself, the roles, everything else. I think everybody needs to acknowledge that every organization is going to have a different approach to how they introduce AI into their organization, and when and how and in what ways. But what we're seeing is there is very much a narrative that says this stuff is great. It's going to just transform everything. It's going to give us new tools. It's going to augment the work. I got a new digital teammate, and it's going to unlock capacity in my day, and all of these other things. And all of that can be true, right? But what we're also seeing is that, particularly at the outset, it can be more work, right? Because you're like any introduction of any new technology into the flow of work. There will be some fits and starts that you have to train it. You may feel then other impacts around am I am I losing a certain degree of autonomy and agency in my job if I'm now paired with AI? What's the impact going to be on my skill development and growth? We talk a lot about the impact on early career talent, where AI may be sort of eroding some of the tasks and jobs that typically is where you cut your teeth early in your career in a variety
Sure.
of different professions, right? And what does this mean for data, for privacy, for ownership of IP? If I train an AI agent, like, am I going to derive value from that and be recognized for it? A whole host of different things. And it, again, it's not to have lots of dark clouds, but it is to raise some of these things in the hope that organizationally you can face them sort of head on, and think through a variety of different workforce impacts to get to really great outcomes, right? Um,
And I think right
yeah,
now, as people are trying to learn what these tools can do and trying to adopt them and proliferate them across the organization, they're also potentially thinking of where the goal is and setting objectives and
hmm
measures for where the goal is versus what that ramp looks like. So, for example, there's always this, we're going to give time back, or we're going to find additional
right,
hours for productivity, where some of the early studies and returns are saying, well, actually, when people get additional time, they
yeah,
don't produce more right away because they're actually using that time to help others adopt these
yes,
new technologies, right?
that's right, that's
Because
right,
part of this is, in order to, you have people that are more advanced or experts with this technology and people that necessarily aren't. You need to create collaboration to get people up to speed. So they're using that additional time to help
hmm
bring others along versus, just selfishly or independently using it to produce more in their
yep,
role.
yep,
But if you're not accounting for that or building that into your measures, you may miss the benefit
that's
that
right.
that's providing to your organization.
Yeah, that's right. And are you even having that conversation, right?
Yeah.
Is really important. So, last thing on this particular trend that maybe I'll just share a little bit about what some of the things are that we're suggesting as actions, as things to think about in dealing with this, and you'll see peppered throughout the research lots of examples of how different organizations, different industries, stories that we thought were sort of relevant to how people are dealing with this. And so we really do talk about this idea of mindset, which is, you know, as you release these tools into the wild, like how are people actually using it? How are we talking about what it means for them? What's our plan for that? How are we going to check and adjust? And then how do we then feed that into a new version of our EVP? And I mentioned some of this earlier in terms of who captures value and who gets rewarded. What's the impact on work-life balance, and what should it be? Because if I'm going to create capacity for you and all I'm going to do is give you more work,
Right.
I'm not sure how I'm going to feel about that, right? Um, and and so there's some interesting examples. I'll pick on one which I really love, Waste Management, which is a you know an organization I've had the privilege of working with in the past, where they've done some really interesting things in terms of how they introduced some AI models and tools to optimize the way their drivers get routed to pick up trash. But they've done it in a way that gives their drivers some measure of autonomy to say, here's what the AI thinks you should do. We think it's a good idea, but we're going to give you some degrees of freedom because you know your territory, you know your route, you're actually out there. But we're going to incent you to make sure that we achieve the business outcome that we're trying to get to, whether it's through a combination of your decisions and the AI's decisions, which is very different than sort of just pushing something out to them that makes them feel disempowered, right?
Yeah, very different.
So I think one last thing, you know, you had an example maybe that you wanted to share here,
Yeah,
Jason, that
so
I'll let you talk through.
this is a visual from Eightfold where it talks about how people are using technology like talent intelligence to provide personalized guidance, especially around career pathing. You know, leveraging skills intelligence for where people can go in the organization. But when you think about what is the value or the return to an organization, it's really emphasizing the what's in it for them, but also changing the conversation. And you said a lot of the issues we've had in the past is around the data. This creates a user layer and a data layer, but it also allows this to become a dynamic process. So as the user interacts with the system and the technology, they're updating their profile, they're adding additional experiences, they're incorporating different pieces of learning to their profile. At the same time, the data layer underneath is continuing to learn and gather information about the market, various skills, other peers, the organization. And these two things are working in concert as this dynamic relationship continues to gather context. And what happens here is this creates almost like a living, breathing experience where, as people are growing in their career, this isn't just creating a static linear career path or career ladder. This is what's enabling movement in organizations where, as skills are changing, as roles are changing, it's allowing for movement in new ways. So when you think about how do we change measures, how do we look at value differently, there's a couple things that organizations are doing as a result of this. They're looking at things like, what new skills are we uncovering in our organization that we weren't tracking before as a result of looking at our people through these talent profiles, right? What new teams or what movement across departments have we seen as a result of this? So instead of just tracking retention, right? Retention is one way. Are they here? Did they stay or did they leave? They're tracking movement, cross pollination. How much cross departmental movement are we having? They're also looking at things like mentoring and circles of learning and mentoring groups and hours gained through programs like this. So this becomes a more dynamic experience, and you start to uncover things that previously may have been invisible. So you start to gather visibility of your talent, of your organization, of your ecosystem and your environment to then make more agile decisions on where you can go as an individual, where the organization can go as a leader, and then potentially how you can create sustainable paths that help avoid for disruption as the world of work changes. You know, there's a lot of organizations that have pivoted into new industries or new areas in the last 3 or 4 years. There's a lot of CEOs that are saying, we know that incorporating AI will be a competitive advantage in the next 3 or 4 years, but we're experimenting on which areas and which projects, so we're not 100% sure on what that path is going to be.
Yep.
How are you
Yep.
going to build career ladders and career paths for that type of environment if you're working in Excel? Right?
Yep.
That's very hard. It's very hard to do with limited data that's static. So the ability to do this in a way, we're working with leaders that say, we want to create a process where people can drive this themselves, but also we get visibility to what their hopes and dreams are. And if we can match what they're raising their hand and they're interested in with the intelligence we're using to drive our business, and there's a greater chance that those two things can meet somewhere in the future, we can create something that's less likely to be disrupted, but also more dynamic. So that way you're not setting your path linked to one thing. That thing can potentially move as the data changes.
Yep. Yep. I love that. And it's a really powerful example of how, an AI powered tool set can create both human and business outcomes, right?
And as a
the same
result of
time.
that, what happens is for every piece of data that gets added, it potentially opens up a
Hmm.
new course or a new opportunity or a new path. So
Yep.
the organizations that have adopted approaches like this have reported employees taking training at higher completion rates because now they're seeing how it links
Hmm.
to opportunities or to paths or to what this means for the organization.
Yep.
It's showing the value and the what's in it for me, but also because the data doesn't get stale and old, people are returning back to the system more frequently than they
Yep.
did before because the information isn't dying on the vine.
Yep. That's great.
Yeah.
That's great. I love it. So let's turn to a polling question, which I think will set up the next segment really nicely in terms of value cases. So you'll see here the question is, how does your organization currently evaluate the value of technology investments? So is it primarily on cost savings or efficiency, which I know popped up in the word cloud quite a bit? Is it a balance between that and employee performance, innovation, and other impacts? Just thinking about how whether employees are using and adopting technologies, or do you even have a consistent framework? So we'll give you a second to as we launch that poll and see what. I'd love to hear what you think.
Yeah, I'm interested to see the results here.
Yeah.
I was thinking about this as we were preparing for today, and I don't want to share with you what my question is until we see some of the results come in. But as you're working with some of your clients,
Yeah.
can you give us some insight into some of the conversations you're having on this topic?
Yeah, sure. I think that look, there is absolutely no question that um, cost is important, cost savings are important. But I think that we are seeing a turn, and you'll see this in some of our data, that more than ever before, there is this acknowledgement that we have to have a balanced set of measures and outcomes, that it can't be just about taking out cost. We're always going to have an eye on that. But in today's world, given the nature of the technologies, given the nature of the business environment, it's got to be about some of these other things. And I love that we're right smack dab in the middle here, that this idea that we've got to have a focus on innovation, on longer term impacts, um, is really profound. And we're seeing that constantly. Now, how to make that happen and how to get from that conviction to somebody writing you a check to actually go make the investment is that's the hard part, right? So
Yeah.
we'll talk about that. But it's great to see that.
Well, thank you everyone that
Yeah,
jumped in
thanks
and contributed to
for
the
that.
poll.
Absolutely.
My two questions were going to be here. One of the options was balanced between efficiency and employee performance.
Yeah.
And as I was looking at the options, a question that I've asked some of your colleagues and peers in previous webinars like this, with AI and especially agents and the way we're kind of
Mm-hmm.
redesigning some of this work,
Mm-hmm.
aren't we also potentially rethinking or redefining the concept of performance?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
You're right.
Performance,
So
when especially if you're changing, as you said earlier, particularly the introduction of some of these AI technologies and agentic AI is going to change the very nature of what somebody's job is. It's going to change what you're expecting of them. It should, and therefore it has to have an impact on what we mean by performance,
yeah, because on the
without
in
question.
the last session when we dove deep into the report, we were talking about the increasingly blurred lines between human machine collaboration, right?
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
then this other one I thought about today was this concept of adoption rates. And I was thinking about that as I was thinking of agents. So
Hmm.
increasingly, people are going to be getting data from systems through agentic interfaces
Yes.
where they may not be even accessing the system or the tool. They're getting the data through an agent or through some other output.
Yep.
So ultimately, what you're measuring is the outcome. And we're going to have
Hmm.
to come up with some new measure because
Yep.
adoption may be hidden,
That's
or
right.
it may be some other thing that's actually adopting the tool. Because I was just learning that we've gotten to the point now where we have agents of agents.
That's right. Oh
Yeah.
yeah, and multi-agent systems and orchestration of agents, and it's it's uh it's getting very complex. In
So, yeah.
hopefully ultimately driving a different kind of simplicity, but a lot of complexity in the background. So
So just a little
um,
food for thought on the need
couldn't
to
agree
think
more.
differently.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep,
Yeah.
absolutely. So that's a perfect setup. If we want to jump back in, I know we want to talk about business cases and then get a little more of your y'all's feedback. Um, so I want to here we go. And want to take you into this chapter we called New Tech, New Work, right? About value cases and share with you sort of our thinking about how to answer this question. How do we get more value out of work and workforce technology? So very broad category. And we what drove us to this and the signals that we saw in the market were really, I think, kind of three big things that seem to have come together on us. One is um, oftentimes, frankly, a checkered history of prior tech investments, right? And you see some of the data here, where 42% of the organizations say that tech investments have been a disappointment because they had either unrealistic business cases or they didn't have data. Um, 73% of the executives said that the inability to define metrics was the biggest challenge in terms of thinking about tech investments.
There you
And
go.
and so a lot of prior investments have failed to meet expectations, or their business cases, or nobody can even tell you if they met their original business cases because they may have had a business case and they took the money and ran and nobody went back and checked. And so that's the first thing is you have leaders saying, when I think about the next investment, is do I want to put good money in after bad? The second thing is the array of technologies in the marketplace that is coming at the organizations we work with is dizzying, right? There's lots of shiny new objects out there, and a lot of great stuff too. But from the perspective of a business leader that's trying to make decisions about what's the right tool for me, should I stick with the platforms that I have as they invest? Should I go out and buy some best of breed solution? Should I go with somebody who's established? Should I go with a startup? Like it's just, and every day there's more things, right, to sort of think about from a tech perspective, which is exciting but daunting. And then the third thing, and you touched on this earlier, Jason, is the very nature of the outcomes that the technology is expected to drive is different than it used to be in many cases. It's no longer the case that it's your average tech investment is a simple, I'm going to spend $1 here on this piece of technology, and I'm going to save X dollars on the other side of that in pure labor savings. I'm just going to automate this piece of work, or I'm going to produce this many more widgets, and that's a very clean and simple business case. Now I'm faced with a challenge that says there's these technologies that are going to make people more productive or enhance collaboration or experience or all these things that I know are good for them and good for the business, but how do I measure that? And so they're struggling with that. So those three things come together and also speak to a lot of these tensions around, again, automation versus augmentation, and am I really measuring outcomes versus outputs? How predictable are the outcomes that's this tech is intended to drive? And so that's really what brought us to this place. And You know, and I'll ask you to chime in here in a second, Jason. But again, I touched on a few of these. So, you know, what's changing the nature of the value case challenge, right? You know, we went from a couple of players in most of the spaces in technology to maybe hundreds. We've got, you know, a handful of use cases that I'm trying to solve for to maybe dozens. A broader range of metrics. You know, what I've had clients say, I do this AI tool and it's going to save everybody 30 minutes a week. That's great. What are you going to do with the 30 minutes, and how are you going to know if you really saved it? And is it driving business value? And so we talk a lot about um, navigating this ecosystem, understanding when do I maybe need to think about this particular type of investment differently. Because on the one hand, I don't want to waste the organization's money, but on the other hand, I don't want to be left behind, and I don't want to be at a competitive disadvantage by not investing or by just, you know, being paralyzed. You know, indecision is a decision.
Correct.
So I think, I don't know if you're seeing some of that, Jason, as you're, you know, engaging with different organizations.
Yeah, 100%. And I think it's an interesting conversation because just like you were alluding to, what a lot of these AI based tools allow for is the ability to shift beyond the incremental outcomes to potentially exponential outcomes. But that's because of the compounding effect of how they learn over time, how they add on top of each other as you layer them or use them together,
Mm-hmm.
especially on some of these platforms and as they learn across tools or across modules. But also, we've moved beyond this world where it's just measuring widget by widget or module by module. Now it's
Mm-hmm.
entire work stream, right? So
That's right.
what is the entire work stream and the value of that work stream to drive outcomes and how all of the pieces fit together to work in concert, and kind of reverse engineering all the different roles in achieving that outcome. Like one
Yep.
of the things that I've been talking about recently is there's been a lot of conversations around skills based, right? Skills based X, skills based Y, and the success rate of becoming skills based. And I've been saying skills based is not the outcome; it's the input, right?
Mm-hmm.
The skills are the input to achieving some outcome that you need to determine in your organization you couldn't achieve otherwise. Is it around flowing talent to the right work? Is it around gaining visibility of existing talent that you can't uncover in your current data structure? Is it
Mm-hmm.
around driving organic growth without adding additional headcount? What is the outcome you're trying to achieve that this helps unlock? That's the
Yep.
outcome. Skills are
Yep.
just the input. But then there's a whole chain of tools that help unlock some of that. And you need to figure out the way to kind of measure that and figure out how you're capturing that. Because, like the individual said before, it can create so many benefits that if you're not able to kind of capture where those benefits go, they can get diluted.
Yep, absolutely, absolutely. So maybe I'll dig into and share with you just a few of the thoughts that we present as kind of potential actions, ways of reframing the business case and the measures, and how you actually think about these new next generation technology investments. And then, because I want to make sure that we get time for one last question and polling question and some Q&A. So there's a couple of things that we bring up here in terms of how to think about these very different kinds of investments in this moment in time, right? One is, we've touched on it, but really reframe what it is you're measuring, right? As you were just saying, Jason, like, what are the outcomes? How are we measuring them? What's the blend of human and business outcomes that we're measuring? Again, it's not that impact on cost or cost structure goes away, but how do I augment and broaden the set of metrics that I'm really going to bake into this business case? And I'm going to invest in some infrastructure to make sure I have some data that's coming off of that that's useful, that's going to resonate still with a CFO as well as a CHRO as well as a COO, right? And sort of really think about when is this an investment case that warrants sort of a different non-traditional approach. There will still be investments in technologies that will be straight labor savings,
Sure.
or productivity improvements, in a manufacturing line, and that's fine. But what we're suggesting is, Not everything's going to be that way, and not everything's that way today in terms of some of the really exciting technologies that are out there. So call that out as you're building the case. We also talk about this. There's a precedent here in terms of very different kinds of ways of thinking about and evaluating investments that isn't particularly common for HR technology investments, but is common in other parts of the business, which is think about research and development investments. Think about product development investments, where you have organizations that are putting real, very significant dollars on the line, making huge company-wide investments, but they're doing it on the basis of saying, I'm going to have a portfolio of investments that I'm going to make,
Yeah.
and they're probabilistic. They're not all going to pan out.
Yep.
And I'm going to have some structure and rigor around how much I'm willing to spend and where I'm going to place my bets. I'm going to have some rigor around how I evaluate those things, how I pull the plug on them. But I also know that not 100% of them are going to deliver individually a very predictable outcome. But in the aggregate, I do have a very rigorous expectation of how they're going to pan out. And I also may have very different time horizons that I think are realistic for those to play out over. And you mentioned that earlier in our discussion, Jason.
Yeah.
And so how do you sort of reframe and recharacterize these investments in that way, which again, people have been doing for a long time with R&D or with new products, they just haven't leveraged it in this context.
And I think there was an article that came out earlier in the year around the April-May timeframe about Johnson and Johnson, where they
Yeah.
had created these project teams to deploy AI within their business, and they had very quickly realized that only about 15% of them were truly making an impact or were going to pay off.
Yep.
But so long as they had the ability to identify which 15% were
That's
the
right.
ones that were going to do that, it was worthwhile. It was worthwhile because then they could scrap the other ones quickly and focus on those 15, and
That's right.
then start a new set to figure out which would be the next 15% that would create an impact.
That's right. And I think it's also, I think it very much plays into what we're seeing in terms of the nature of some of these technologies, where they're so new, and they're delivering really exciting things, but there's a lot of change, and oftentimes it's not one tool or piece of technology by itself that is going to deliver a very predictable result. It could be a series of investments that you have a high degree of confidence that if I make these 2 or 3 investments in the right way, in the right sequence, it's going to really unlock a lot of value. Or, as we've talked about in the past, I'm going to make an investment in something that's really a foundational platform for my business and will unlock all sorts of capabilities. And that's certainly true in the talent intelligence space, right?
Yeah.
So the last thing we mentioned is kind of thinking about the stakeholders, because this is also something that happens in a lot of conventional business case scenarios where one stakeholder tends to be the owner of the business case or the approver of the business case. And that was in some respects easier when the nature of the benefits delivered was simpler.
Sure.
And was confined to a particular function. I'm going to invest in this HR tool and it's going to save me this many heads in HR. We're in a very different world right now where I'm going to make an investment and it's going to unlock value in a very diffuse way that's very powerful for the enterprise, but it's hard to capture from the perspective of a single stakeholder or his or her budget.
Yep.
So you need to think about, who am I engaging? Who am I co-creating this business case with? The CFO, the CHRO, the CEO, right? To say, what commitments do we make? What bets do we want to place? Knowing that we're going to capture the value in a lot of different places. So with that, we will have a little bit of time for questions. I want to launch one last polling question here, and then we'll open it up to some Q&A and share some links and stuff with you as well. So what's the biggest challenge your organization is facing when building a business case for new technology? Is it some of the things we talked about unclear ROI? Is it just buy-in from executives? Is it there's too many other things going on, prior poor performance, other things? Would love to hear people's feedback, and Jason, maybe some of what you may have seen in the market.
I think part of the thing that I think I've seen often is people aren't sure what problem they're fully solving for. And sometimes they're looking for the tool to help identify the problem.
Mm.
And it's a chicken or the egg conversation.
Yeah.
So part of it is how do they design the project around these measures and around the ROI without fully knowing exactly what it is they're addressing.
Yep. Yep. Yep.
But
Absolutely.
thinking about your content here and listening to the research, your first slide were those opposing tensions, and we talked about, is it just the acknowledgement and awareness of the dynamics, and there's no such thing as balance, but now
Hmm.
the ability to visualize and quantify where you are. I
Hmm.
think as we've talked about what some of this new capability allows for and thinking of some of these new measures and creating ROI and value, what some of this capability around dynamic data and talent intelligence and AI creates is the ability to move beyond not just how many or when or how much,
Hmm.
right? But who and why and additional context, right? So when you get around not just quantitative, but some of that qualitative, and you mentioned not just the business measures, but some of those human measures,
Hmm.
I think that's how this ties a lot of the 2025 human capital trends
Yeah.
together.
Yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think it's fascinating what we're seeing here that, we got a lot of votes for unclear ROI, but just what's overtaken that as well is too many priorities, too many competing priorities. And to me, that really resonates based on what a lot of my clients are up against. But it also speaks to this idea that you really, even if you are building a business case off in one corner of the business, you're ultimately going to have to be prepared to help the organization and leaders manage those priorities and those trade-offs. Because the reality is, this is about capital allocation, right? It's like, I only have so many dollars. I'm going to have to invest them here or here or here. How do I help those leaders really compare in an apples to apples way what the ultimate business value is of these different investments relative to one another,
Yeah.
rather than coming at it from a siloed kind of functional perspective.
And we
So I
started
think
this
it's really
session
helpful.
talking about transformation, and transformation is often a team sport, but a
Yep.
team can often bring competing priorities.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. So I think we have just a couple of minutes left here. I don't know if we have any Q&A that we want to address. And in the meantime, we'll bring up a couple of QR codes here. If you're interested, we'd love for you to dig in to the report. We have two different ones. One is the full report and all the chapters, as well as there's accompanying videos and infographics and whatnot on the site. So give you a second to capture those.
It's really great stuff. I have it bookmarked and I have it downloaded. Doesn't never gets too far from my computer.
Well, a lot of my clients actually, God bless them. If they read the whole thing, I'm delighted. But I'm happy if they check on the videos and whatnot. But I encourage them, like, take it and unpack it, share some things with your teams to get them. They're great thought starters. Or take some of those nuggets, some of those statistics, and put them in your presentations. When you're trying to make a business case or you're trying to have a leadership conversation, and that's actually how a lot of them have consumed it and used it in the past. Um,
And then you have one more,
yeah, we do
one
have
more
one
good.
more. We'll flip it up and just a quick commercial. Not really a commercial, not selling anything. But we are, the minute we publish the 2025 trends, we start working on the 2026 trends. And you saw the 13,000 respondents. The only way we get there is by hearing your voices. The survey that is going to inform next year's trends is open right now. That's the QR code. It doesn't take very long. To respond, and we would love to get anybody's perspectives and voices included. So if you have just a couple of minutes, I encourage you to scan that and answer so that you can lend your perspective to next year's trends.
So
Well,
Victor and Jason, thank you so much. This was an informative and important presentation. Thank you so much. It was so interesting. It doesn't look like we have any questions from the audience. I guess you were so thorough that they
It
didn't
was a
have
lot.
any, but maybe like in 30 seconds or so, Victor, is there maybe a small step that an organization can take that can um, just a shift that they can start with that new value case that they can begin today?
Sure. Yeah. No, I absolutely. I think that it really what I'd say is think about the conversation around the value case in a little bit different way. Challenge that conversation from how you may be usually having it, which is number one, not just a gate to getting money to make an investment, but really a value case should be something that will be living and breathing throughout the life of an effort so that and that should give your stakeholders actually greater confidence that says here's our plan for making sure that there's not just a business case I'm going to bring to you now so that you make a one-time decision to give me money and hope it pans out, but we actually have a plan to say every step of the way we're going to try to understand and measure, are we realizing and capturing value, right? Because that's going to, I think, put you in a much more powerful position individually and organizationally to say, yeah, we actually know that we're making smart choices and smart investments and not just sort of going through the motions of putting a business case together.
Perfect, Victor. Thank you. Well, just a reminder to our HCI members, today's webcast has been approved for HRCI and SHRM credit as well for the HCI recertification. So your credits for attending this webcast will soon show up in your My HCI profile under the transcribe tab. So, and while you're there, don't forget to check out hci.org for even more insights, as well as information on our certifications, live conferences, premium memberships, and more. And one more time, I just want to thank both of our presenters today, Victor and Jason, and thank you to our sponsor, Eightfold. And I'd like to thank our webcast viewers. Thanks for spending your hour with us, and we'll see you next time. Have a great rest of your day.
Great.
thank you so
Thank you.
much.
Thanks all.